Hello everybody, my name is Super Chicken. I've had a few requests on Twitter asking to see the deck list that I've been using in my last few videos, so I thought I'd put a little deck tech up here and show you what it's all about. This deck is a constant work in progress, so I am always updating it and always tweaking things, so this list that I'm showing you here may not be exactly 100% how my last few videos have been, but 95% has been the same. A lot of the cards have been interchangeable with one another, so it is more or less what the list I've been using is. Of course, you should be encouraged to make changes to it if you do want to actually play with this list to suit sort of what you're expecting to play against. So if you're coming up against a lot of aggro or aggressive decks, you definitely want to have a lot of earlier cheap spells, maybe an extra Arcane Explosion, that sort of thing. So tweak it as you see, as necessary. So without further ado, here we go. I thought I'd first start off with just talking about the spells that I've taken up at the start here. It's a good idea to sort of max out on the Arcane Missiles and Frostbolt, in my opinion. These two are really the mana-efficient spells that sort of allow me to trade off with people's early threats. In case you didn't know, the actual aim of this deck here is to eventually cast one of these large creatures down here. Usually, I have Ysera in here as well. I have just subbed it out for the Black Knight just recently, because Ysera has been a little bit too slow. So I'll get to that in a minute though. The whole point of the deck is basically to stall the game to a point when I can actually resolve Ragnaros, and he can just do his thing. Usually I set Ragnaros up behind a Spellbender or a Counterspell, just to sort of keep it alive. It's pretty good to play a Ragnaros and have a Counterspell up, and when they go to destroy it or take it with a Mind Control or something like that, boom, you pop your secret and away you go. You can just continue to fireball them. So in order to get to that stage of the game, I use these early spells to keep the pressure off me. Arcane Missiles is really good for one cost, because you can just sort of belt it out. Arcane Missiles, Arcane Explosion, and Frostbolt in particular, these three, go really well with Blood Mage Thalnos. Blood Mage is not the sort of thing that you want to play on turn 2. I have said this before, but you don't want to play it on turn 2. It's just because you have the mana doesn't mean that you just go ahead and do it. Typically, you want to resolve him maybe on turn 4 or 6 or 8 or something like that in conjunction with another spell. Hypothetically, if you were looking at a toughness 4 creature, you could play Blood Mage and Frostbolt in the same turn and kill that creature. So just playing Blood Mage on turn 2 with no actual spell backup is a pretty good way just to have his Death Rattle activated immediately. And that's not really why he's in the deck. He's there to give that a little bit extra oomph in a spell. It's really good when you do something like Arcane Explosion. So if they go, Fairy Dragon into, a lot of toughness 2 creatures, on your 4th turn play, you could be Blood Mage into Arcane Explosion for a 2 damage wipe to all the creatures. Really, you want to use him for the cheap spell damage increase. That's his primary use. I mean, there has been a time when I've been in a pickle where he has been on 1 health, then I would ping it with my own Pyroblast just to draw a card. You can do that. That's alright. Sometimes you'll be back against the wall and you'll need to come up with something creative like that to get the card that you do need. Wild Pyromancer is something that I'm sort of experimenting with at the moment. It's a really interesting alternative to running an Arcane and a second Arcane Explosion. Wild Pyromancer in this case sort of is my second Arcane Explosion. It's good in the way that I can activate it multiple times, or twice really. And it's also good in the way that I can activate it once and still persist on the board. In one of my earlier videos, I managed to throw down the Wild Pyromancer in the same turn I did an Arcane Explosion, which ultimately did sort of like 2 damage to every single creature on the board, but it also left Wild Pyromancer left with 1 health on the field, and that allowed me to continue to pressure the opponent. It was really, really nice. I was playing with 2 for a while. There are times when you don't want to see it though, so maybe the 1 is right for this deck. I'm not too sure. I'm still sort of playing with it. There's a very real chance that this card could be a Kobold Geomancer, and it would behave in the same way as the Blood Mage, that you would just play it and then use one of your spells here to sort of get that increased damage, like a 4 damage Frostbolt or something like that. This is a little bit different to how the spell power works though, because of how, if you use it with an Arcane Explosion, for example, the end result is that you would have done 2 damage to every creature, every enemy creature, the same way as if you used a Kobold Geomancer. However, there are times when you want to sort of Frostbolt a dude and also sweep the board for 1 damage at the same time, so it has some interesting interactions with the other spells, whereas a Kobold Geomancer or a, Blood Mage would just make the Frostbolt a 4 damage spell. So I don't know, it's more flexible by having two different sort of things here. If I had another Kobold Geomancer, it would just sort of be like my second and third Blood Mage, or a worse version of the Blood Mage. So I've gone the Wild Pyromancer for the time being because it gives me a different avenue of attack, which I think is valuable, and that's sort of why I'm doing it. There's a very real chance that I should have a second Arcane Explosion. I'm definitely coming up against a lot of aggro at the moment, so that should probably be bumped up to 2. And I could almost certainly drop a second Flame Strike to get that to a 2. Matter of fact, I could probably just go ahead and do that right now. It's the early aggression that's really getting at me recently. It seems to be more and more common, so that seems to be like a really good answer. Arcane Intellect is sort of like the draw card of choice. I normally play it when around the mid game when there's a lull in the action. If they haven't got anything on the board and nothing's really happening, because this deck is so reactive to what they're doing. If they don't do anything for a turn or nothing significant, I can just hit this, draw 2 cards. It sort of pulls my card advantage ahead. It's a good card to have. Counterspell is probably the single best card in this deck. That and probably Spellbinder together. It's a tight race there. Basically, we use these, in total, 4 spells to secure one of our large threats at the end of the game. We place like a Ragnaros down behind a Counterspell, and whatever they choose to try to destroy that creature, because they might be sitting on a Polymorph or something. They hold back a card to handle whatever big thing that you play. So the turn before you play, a Counterspell or a Spellbender, and then play your Ragnaros, and they'll attempt to destroy it, but it just gets eaten up by a Counterspell. It's absolutely superb. This is the reason this deck was made in the first place, for that interaction between those cards. Basically, the whole idea of the deck is to set one of these up, hopefully it goes unpopped, and then you drop this ban. I did have a single Ice Barrier and a single Mirror Entity. I'll just find Mirror Entity for you so you can see what that is. Mirror Entity here. I had that in place. As it turns out, Mirror Entity is pretty bad. I did play with it for a long time. I had 2, I dropped it to 1, and now I've just dropped it entirely. I've put an Ice Block in there. Ice Block's fantastic, by the way. Yeah, I'll talk about that in a minute. There's a very real chance that this Ice Barrier should be an Ice Block as well. But for the sake of variety, I've gone for a different one here. Just for the sake, no sense on doubling up if you can sort of diversify, in my opinion. Ice Barrier is still alright, but there's a very real chance that Ice Block is just going to be better. It's a matter of opinion in this case. I think you would take whatever suits you the most. Ice Barrier is the sort of thing that it's just an 8, it's a spare 8 health. You'd probably want to drop this sort of in the mid game preferably, because there's ways to do damage to your character that won't trigger Ice Barrier. Like if you get Pyroblasted with something like that, it's not going to trigger Ice Barrier, so that 8 extra armor that you sort of have in your mind that you have doesn't necessarily apply. So, make sure you play it sort of early so that it has a chance to trigger on just some random minion that attacks you. And then you should be alright. Spellbender is much the same as Counterspell. Spellbender sort of benefits in some ways against like priests and druids who like to play a lot of buffs, because sometimes you can just steal their buff, and then, if they play Mark of the Wild on you, and you just get a Spellbender with a free Mark of the Wild, that's superb. Obviously, it also eats up a Destroy spell, so that's pretty good too. If they try to mind control your Ragnaros, they'll take your 1/3 Spellbender, which is a little bit disappointing for them, but pretty damn good for you. There are times when Counterspell or Spellbender will be better. It just sort of depends on what, you sort of need. In this case, we're going to play all the full set of both, because we just need to maximize it. If there was another Counterspell style of card available, I would probably take that as well. This will sort of pick up cards like if people want to Bloodlust all their totems or something like that, you can Counterspell that and stop being murdered, whereas Spellbender won't pick that up. But Spellbender has the added ability of stealing a buff every now and then. Vaporizers keeps our secret count up. This is a secret control deck, so we do sort of have I think it was 8 secrets in this deck. 2, 4, 6, 8. Yeah, 8. I feel like you could go to 6. 6 would be okay. Like if you wanted to drop 2 of these secrets, that would be acceptable. But 8 seems good. I don't particularly want to go higher either, because that means more than a third of your deck is made up of secrets, and that just means every third card you're drawing a secret, and sometimes it's too much. Vaporizer is one of those cards that is just really, really good. You've got to really time it, though, if you want to get the maximum sort of value out of it. If you can sort of ping away their creatures with your low attack spells and then sort of sit a Vaporize down, you might be able to clean up a mid-range minion that can be sometimes particularly hard to get rid of. Maybe like a Chillwind Yeti is pretty good. It's even better if you can get something like an Argent Crusader. Argent Crusader? The, I've forgotten his name. Let me just find it so I don't... Oh, sorry, there he was. Sorry, Argent Commander. So if you can snag an Argent Commander and get rid of his Defiant Shield in the same sort of spell, you're getting a lot more value, because they assume that they're going to get a lot of value from a card like that. It's just a straight destroy. And considering that you don't actually have a lot of destroy effects in the deck, it's all like direct damage. Destroy sort of does circumvent things like Divine Shield and other things like that. So that's pretty rad to have. Kirin Mage is sort of one of those things that you play to get value from your secrets. It's a good card. I think it's actually a really good card. I don't see a lot of it being played. I feel it's decent enough to keep playing it in this deck. If I really, really needed to make space, I could cut it. But I mean, it's alright. I mean, it's 4 attack, which is really good, because priests can't really touch things with 4 attack. Because of Shadow Word Pain and Shadow Word Death, they missed that. But you can also play the Kirin Mage, trade off with something, and drop one of your spells down. Which is it just sort of increases the speed at which you can get out your secrets, which is pretty rad. I actually really, really like Kirin Mage. Probably more, like I sort of have a little bit of like a pet love for the card. I like it probably more than what it's worth. But always keeping my eye on this one. For a while I was running both 2 Kirin Mages and the Ethereal Arcanist, I believe it was called. If I can just find him. He might have been here. Sorry, I'm on the wrong page. I mean, this card right here. I used them both. And it was pretty good, because I usually always had a secret up, and then, you play Ethereal Arcanist, and at the end of your turn, he becomes a 5/5. And that's sort of, then, that card really demands some instant attention. Like, they really do need to handle that card, otherwise, it's going to be a 7/7, a 9/9, and so on. So it usually does get destroyed instantly. But as long as you're okay with that, and you know that it's going to demand, like, it's going to be a bullet magnet, like they're just going to shoot it straight away. It is still pretty good, though, because if they don't have that bullet available to them, he can wreak a lot of havoc. I went from 2, I had 2 in the original version of the deck, I cut it to 1, and I eventually cut it down to 0. Because whilst it was really sweet to have a dude that could just beat down all day long, he wasn't really sticking to the plan of the deck, and that was to sit around until I resolved something like this. I didn't really want a mid-range creature other than what I already had in the way of Azure Drakes. And Kirin Mages. It just was sort of beefing out that sort of role in the deck that I didn't need it beefed out. Keep an eye on this one. I'd say play it if you really like it. I think he's pretty rad. Fireball, I think you just got to take 2 of those. I haven't seen a single mage deck that doesn't take 2 of these. It's really, really good. It gets boosted by Blood Mage. It can trigger Wild Pyromancer. It's your highest damage and cheapest costing spell. It's the best. It's also really, really good for shooting them right in the face. But don't do this. I mean, I see a lot of low-level mages, or people who are new to mages, or new to the game, or new to trading card games, that as soon as they get to 4 mana, and because I don't play any creatures, they go, oh, I have to play something immediately. So they just fireball my character, and I take 6 damage, and then, they could have gotten so much more value if they used the fireball on one of my creatures, one of my very important creatures that I put down later on. Certainly use it if you're going to win the game. If they're sitting on like 5 life, just do it. Finish them. Polymorph is probably the best, most consistent removal in the deck. You can get rid of anything in the deck. Most people will know how good this card already is, so I don't need to talk too much about this one. In combination with Fireblast, your hero passive, I think it's particularly good. You can sheep, and for an extra 2 mana, you can just remove it straight away. Before, it gets a Mark of the Wild or a Blessing of Kings or something ridiculous, and then the sheep starts beating you for 5 damage or something humiliating. Definitely keep 2 of these, but I think the aim of the game here is to hold them for as long as humanly possible, and use it to remove something that is really, really going to mess up your hairstyle. Don't just throw it out. If you've got any other removal, try to use that. And even then, sometimes if you can't remove a creature and all you have is a polymorph, you got to ask yourself, do I need to remove this creature? Can I just, if it was, the slime, the ooze. Oh, gee, I'm so bad with the names today. Everyone's laughing and shouting it out. Acidic swamp ooze. If they have one of those out and he's beating you for 3 damage, and if you've got a bit of life, you don't have to polymorph that. You can spend 2 turns pinging it with your passive Fireblast, and sure, you take like an extra maybe 3, possibly 6 extra damage, but you've saved this spell, and when he ends up resolving something like a Ragnaros of his own, you can then just hit it, boom, with Polymorph. Azure Drake is sort of like the big daddy version of Blood Mage Thalnos. If you're sort of using Blood Mage Thalnos, you sort of know how to use an Azure Drake. Use it sort of to increase the spell damage of your next spell, and that's really, really sweet. At the same time, he's a 4/4 sort of beater, so he just sort of gets in there, gets dirty. This card appears in a lot of decks. It's not just a mage thing. You see him in almost any deck that's going to be running any sort of card that would benefit from spell damage. But at the same time, his battlecry, just draw a card and you play a 4/4, is almost, if not probably is, a good enough reason just to take the card anyway. Don't leave home without 2. I think he's very important. The Black Knight I've got here because I've had a recent... in most of my other videos, this was actually Ysera. I'll bring Ysera up so you can see what that's all about. That's her right here. Her, he, her. I'm going to go with her. Ysera was sort of tag teaming with Ragnaros here. I would search through my deck until I found one of these cards and put it out. I think Ysera is really, really, really good. And the only reason I'm not taking it at the moment is because I'm just trying other things. So I've tried Alexstrasza. I even tried Nozdormu, but that didn't go great. Alexstrasza was a little bit better, but still not where I wanted to be. Out of these 3, Ysera was easily the best, but I am trying other things. I'm sort of lowering my curve a little bit. Black Knight can be really, really good sometimes. So it's more for his battlecry. You just want to instantly remove a creature, and that's sort of like a destroy spell right there. The Black Knight usually gets 2 cards for 1 minimum. Like, you will play him, you will destroy a card, so you're 1 card up already. Then they will use a spell to remove him, possibly even 2. So he's just sort of like a really valuable sort of card. I'm sort of digging him. The only trade-off of playing him instead of another finisher like Ysera is that I really, really need to dig through my deck until I hit Ragnaros. And there have been times where Ragnaros has been like the last card in my deck or the second last card. And yeah, they're tight games because you do no damage until you actually get a Ragnaros out. So you draw him as the last card. You're like, oh, okay, sweet. You play him and then hope that you don't get burnt out by fatigue. It's good. So I mean, for those who prefer to have 2 finishes, I would definitely probably pick up Ysera is probably the best choice here at the moment. I am still yet to try out you know what? He's in the crafting mode. I'll bring him up. The Archmage. I've heard mixed things about him. I mean, I've heard he's good, I've heard he's bad. I don't really know. I've got to save up a lot just to try him out, so I'll be trying him out soon enough. I'll let you know. I'll just close that. I think 3 more cards to talk about in depth here is one is Flame Strike. When I started this video, I had 2. I think that is probably a little bit top heavy. I mean, the curve really sort of I had too much action at the end of the deck there. I really wanted to lower it. It seems like I got a lot of action at like the the 3 mana mark, which is sort of where I want to be. I think definitely don't want to be higher than that. And there are times when you just sort of flat out drawing too many Flame Strikes. I think 1 is fine. Honestly, I could probably, if I wanted another sort of solid sweeper like that, I'd play a Abomination, I think. Abomination seems pretty good. It sort of depends on the sort of aggression that you're expecting to face as well, because you could easily get by with another Wild Pyromancer if you wanted, and that would really beef out this early sort of like between Arcane Missiles, Arcane Explosion, Wild Pyromancer. You've got a lot of sort of like low cost, cheap, and lightly damaging splash effects that sort of hit everything. But if, everything is sort of living through that, like if they're really, really tough, then it might be time to go up to another Flame Strike. But I'd probably be looking at taking an Abomination before I do that. This fellow seems to be pretty good. Pyroblast is a really, really good spell. I think you should definitely pick 1 up. I know a lot of mages play with 2. Personally, in this list, I think 1 is fine. There are too many times when I get the Pyroblast and I actually have to use it on a minion because I'm getting beaten down so hard. So it's sort of like my third Fireball. My third Fireball that costs twice as much. I'm trying to work the deck into a position where I can throw that as a finisher to their face a little bit more regularly. So I think 1 is the magic number for me at this point in time for this deck. I mean, of course I've seen the other decks that run 2 Pyroblasts and, you know, Mountain Giants and all that sort of hoo-ha. But I think for this, in combination with Ragnaros, the Pyroblast is, as a single one, is fine. 10 damage is a lot. It can be a lot more if it's like a 12, if you've got, you know, a Blood Mage or a Azure Drake out at the same time. It can be pretty nasty. Ragnaros is probably the reason I've chosen Ragnaros over Ysera, because at the moment I'm only running 1 finisher, is because he's just so damn good. 8 damage is probably the most sort of instant effect that you can get on the same turn as playing him. What I mean by that is if you play, you know, if you can play any legendary card in the whole game, anything at all, what card do you want to play? And the answer to that would be a card that instantly affects the battlefield in some way. So, I mean, you can look at some of these other cards, for example, some of these other finishes, and I don't own them all, so I'll look at some a bad example perhaps would be Gruul. Because, you know, you'll play him, he's a 7-7, he turns into an 8-8, I mean, if they pass the turn back, he becomes a 9-9, but he hasn't actually done anything yet. You've passed the turn to them, and you give them all the time in the world just to use a Shadow Word Death on them, or some removal spell that's just, you know, that they've been holding because they know you're going to play something like that. And then, you know, at best, next turn, you'll swing for 9 damage. Ragnaros shoots for 8 the turn he comes down. If they don't do anything again, he shoots for another 8. So that's like a lot more oppressive. He does a lot more. Plus, at the same time, he can't be crowd controlled by things like Cone of Cold and Frost and you know, all those sorts of things. He's just sort of like, he just throws down really, really hard. I can't think of another legendary card, or it doesn't have to be legendary. I can't think of another card that I would prefer to have at this point other than him. No. Ysera is a close second. I found out that I actually do quite like Alexstrasza as well, but I found that personally I don't think Ragnaros and Alexstrasza play well together in the same deck. Because if you play Ragnaros before Alexstrasza, Alexstrasza looks like garbage. But if you do Alexstrasza then Ragnaros, it's pretty good. And I don't like how it's so conditional on the order that I play it. The reason I would play 2 finishes is just so that I can find one more easily. So if you're a patient person, then you can probably get by with just playing 1 finisher. But if you are, you know, a little bit stressed out that you might not get the card you need, or you might lose the card that you need, you know, you play the card and it gets destroyed, you're like, well, I'm done. Probably play 2. So, yeah, nothing really compares to this man. He's just really, really good. Really strong. And that's why I have him there. There are a few variations you can take on this list. I think, as I mentioned before, Wild Pyromancer could perhaps be a Kobold, or even maybe a Cone of Cold. You could change him into a crowd control spell. That'd be, if you want to change some things, that'd be the first choice there. If you don't have a Blood Mage Thalanos, you can easily play it with a Wild Pyromancer or a Kobold, or maybe a Frost Nova or Cone of Cold. Everything else should be reasonably easy enough to obtain. If you don't have Ice Block, play Ice Barrier. That's fine. You can play 2 of them. Spellbender is one of those ones that you probably, if you like this particular playstyle, you probably do want to invest in. It's particularly good. I realize, you know, if you don't have it, you're really putting a lot of stress on your counterspells. That's the only thing. So this sort of like takes the stress off your counterspells, and which takes the stress off your Ragnaros. So I would say you probably need these ones to sort of make this deck work. You could probably do without the Kirin Tor Mages if you really, really wanted to. I'm sure you could find something else in the 3 mana slot. You could probably just replace it with an Abomination, or even perhaps a Gadget Stand Auctioneer, which is a 5 cost creature. There he is. Something like that, if you just happen to have it. Abomination is pretty good. Always keep in mind that you want to keep the cost down, because you'd be turning a 3 costing creature into a 5 costing creature. But I'm sure you can find something in here that would be pretty good. Acolyte of Pain is pretty good, especially in a mage deck. You can also always ping your own creature with Fireblast to draw a card. So, you know, perhaps keep that in mind. The others, I would say, are reasonably non-negotiable. If you don't have a Pyroblast, that's fine. You can probably just get another cheaper removal spell like a Cone of Cold. Although I would say you probably need a really reasonable finisher. If you don't have Ragnaros, it's not the end of the world. You could probably get away with playing almost any legendary, really, if you just want to sort of, like, you will have an effect on the game if you play any legendary, especially if you're backing it up with, counterspells. But I'd say he's the best choice. If you've got the cards, definitely play 2 if you prefer something like that. Yeah, and that's more or less it. What more can I say? I think when you play, you just gotta be... Patience is the aim of the game. You just need to get into a position where you are in total control. And that'll usually look like nothing on their side of the board, or very little on their side of the board, and they will have like 2 or less cards in hand. At the same time, you'll probably have like 6 cards in hand, and you're looking pretty good. You can play your counterspell past the turn. They'll probably play a creature. You can then play Ragnaros on your turn, and then you'll probably just win the game from there. No matter what they do, if they try to remove it, it will be just absorbed by one of these counterspells. Anyway, that's more or less the deck I've been using for the last week and a half, 2 weeks. I am actually evolving this deck from now on. I have a couple of other things that I'm working on. Something like this. It's similar, but it is different. A couple of other things like that. And I'll let you know how we go. If you want to try it out, let me know how it goes on Twitter. Thanks for listening.